A 7-year-old boy disappears during his own birthday party, leaving his family devastated and a community searching for answers. For 7 long years, the mystery of his disappearance haunts a small suburban town. Then one day, his grandmother climbs into the attic of her home to retrieve old photo albums, and what she discovers leaves her screaming in disbelief. The town of Millfield was known for its charming streets lined with maple trees, its excellent public schools, and the kind of close-knit community where neighbors still borrowed cups of sugar from one another. Nestled in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, the town had a population of just under 5,000 people. It was the kind of place where families stayed for generations, where the 4th of July parade was the highlight of the summer, and where crime was limited to occasional teenage vandalism or minor traffic violations. That's why the disappearance of Ethan Collins shook Millfield to its core. Rebecca Collins still remembered every detail of that day 7 years ago. The smell of chocolate cake baking in the oven, the sound of children's laughter echoing through the backyard, the bright blue balloons tied to the mailbox, swaying gently in the autumn breeze. Her son Ethan's 7th birthday party had been in full swing, with a dozen of his classmates running around playing games under the watchful eyes of parents who chatted amicably on the patio. Rebecca stood at her kitchen window, rinsing fruit for the fruit salad she was preparing. Through the glass, she could see her husband Michael entertaining the children with an elaborate scavenger hunt. Ethan was easy to spot in his favorite red t-shirt, his sandy blonde hair catching the sunlight as he darted excitedly from clue to clue. When the timer on the oven beeped, Rebecca turned away from the window to remove the cake. It couldn't have been more than 2 minutes, 3 at most. But when she looked back out at the yard, something felt off. She scanned the groups of children, counting heads. 11. There should have been 12. She didn't panic at first. Kids, that age, were always wandering off, distracted by a butterfly or an interesting rock. She stepped outside onto the patio. "Michael," she called to her husband, keeping her voice casual so as not to alarm the other children or parents. "Where's Ethan?" Michael glanced around, momentarily confused. "He was just here. We were looking for the treasure behind the oak tree." One of Ethan's friends, a little girl with pigtails, piped up. "Ethan went that way," she said, pointing toward the side gate that led to the front yard. "He said he saw something." Michael immediately headed toward the gate while Rebecca asked the other parents to keep an eye on the remaining children. She followed her husband, a growing knot of worry forming in her stomach. The front yard was empty. Michael jogged out to the sidewalk, looking up and down the street. "Ethan!" he called, his voice echoing off the houses. "Ethan, buddy, where are you?" They expanded their search, checking with neighbors, looking behind bushes and parked cars. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The other parents joined the search, leaving one adult to watch all the children in the backyard. Soon, the birthday party had transformed into a frantic search operation, with worried adults fanning out across the neighborhood calling Ethan's name. At the 30-minute mark, Rebecca called the police. By the time they arrived, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. The officers were kind but thorough, asking detailed questions about what Ethan had been wearing, who had been at the party, whether there had been any strangers in the neighborhood recently. As dusk fell, more police arrived. They brought search dogs that sniffed Ethan's clothing and then tracked his scent to the sidewalk in front of the house where it abruptly ended. One officer suggested he might have gotten into a car, either willingly or unwillingly. The word unwillingly sent Rebecca into a fresh wave of panic. The children were sent home with their shaken parents. The birthday cake sat untouched on the kitchen counter, the candles never lit. The wrapped presents remained stacked on the dining room table, waiting for a boy who wasn't there to open them. That night was the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch into days, then weeks, then months, and eventually years. The police investigation turned up frustratingly little. No one had seen a suspicious vehicle. The few neighbors with security cameras didn't capture anything unusual. Ethan had simply vanished, as if plucked from existence in the brief moment. Rebecca had turned away to check the cake. The first year was a blur of police interviews, press conferences, and search parties. Rebecca and Michael appeared on national news programs pleading for information. Ethan's face was plastered on missing child posters throughout the state. The Collins family established a reward fund that grew to over $50,000 for information, leading to Ethan's return. But as time passed, the active investigation slowed. The media attention waned. The community, while still supportive, began to move on. For Rebecca and Michael, however, life had been permanently cleaved into before and after. Their marriage, once solid, began to crack under the weight of their grief. Michael threw himself into his work as an accountant, staying late at the office, avoiding the empty bedroom down the hall from theirs. Rebecca quit her job as a kindergarten teacher, unable to bear the daily reminder of children Ethan's age, growing up without him. By the third anniversary of Ethan's disappearance, they were living separate lives under the same roof. By the fourth, Michael had moved out, renting an apartment across town. The divorce was finalized a year later, quiet and amicable, two people united only by their shared loss. Rebecca stayed in the family home, unable to bring herself to sell it and erase the last place Ethan had been. She turned his bedroom into something of a shrine, preserving it exactly as it had been on the day he disappeared. The dinosaur bedspread remained neatly tucked in. The model airplane still hung from the ceiling. The bookshelf still held his favorite stories, gathering dust but otherwise untouched. Rebecca's mother, Eleanor, worried constantly about her daughter's mental health. After the divorce, she began visiting more frequently, driving the 2 hours. From her home in Pittsburgh to spend weekends with Rebecca, she would gently encourage her daughter to go out, to reconnect with friends, to consider dating again. Sometimes Rebecca would humor her, agreeing to dinner with a neighbor or a movie with old colleagues, but her heart wasn't in it. How could she possibly explain to someone new the hollow space that Ethan's absence had carved inside her? 6 years after the disappearance, Rebecca reluctantly agreed to start seeing a therapist. Dr. Melinda Patel specialized in trauma and grief counseling, and under her guidance, Rebecca slowly began to rebuild some semblance of a life. She started volunteering at the local animal shelter, finding comfort in the unconditional affection of the rescued dogs and cats. She joined a support group for parents of missing children, sharing her story and drawing strength from others who truly understood her pain, and eventually she made the difficult decision to pack up some of Ethan's things. Not to erase him, never that, but to create a healthier way of preserving his memory. With Dr. Patel's encouragement, Rebecca selected a few meaningful items to keep in a memory box. Ethan's favorite stuffed bear, the baseball cap his father had bought him at his first Pirates game, a collection of birthday cards from his 6th birthday. The rest, clothing he had long since outgrown, toys he would have lost interest in as a teenager, the furniture that had defined his childhood room, would be stored in the attic. The bedroom itself would be repainted and repurposed as a home office, a space where Rebecca could pursue her newfound interest in writing children's books, stories filled with adventurous little boys who always found their way home. Eleanor came to help with the packing and redecorating, spending 2 weeks at the house that summer. Together, mother and daughter carefully wrapped each item in tissue paper, labeled boxes with detailed inventories, and carried them up to the attic. It was painful work, but also cathartic in a way Rebecca hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what Ethan might be like now. A teenager of 14, probably taller than her, voice deepening, interested in things she couldn't even guess at. He'd probably be embarrassed by these dinosaur sheets now, she said to her mother one afternoon, managing a small smile as she folded the well-worn bedding. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Probably, though you never know with boys. Your brother kept his Star Wars sheets until he left for college. These small moments of lightness were precious, brief respites from the grief that still lingered beneath the surface. By the end of those 2 weeks, Ethan's room had been transformed. The walls were now a soothing sage green instead of the bright blue he had chosen. A desk stood where his bed had been. New curtains hung in the windows. It was still a room filled with memories, but no longer a shrine frozen in time. After helping with the renovation, Eleanor returned to Pittsburgh, promising to visit again for Thanksgiving. Rebecca settled into her new routine, spending mornings in the repurposed room working on her stories, afternoons at the animal shelter, and evenings with her support group, or occasionally with new friends from her volunteer work. It was a week before the 7th anniversary of Ethan's disappearance when Rebecca received an unexpected phone call. It was from Detective Laura Reeves, one of the original officers assigned to Ethan's case. Though the active investigation had been scaled back years ago, Detective Reeves had never forgotten the little boy who vanished during his own birthday party. "Mrs. Collins," the detective said, her voice measured as always, "I wanted to let you know that we've received a new tip. Someone reported seeing a boy matching Ethan's description in a town about 3 hours from Millfield." Rebecca's heart leaped, then immediately constricted with caution. There had been similar calls over the years, potential sightings that had all led nowhere. She had learned to temper her hope with realism. "What kind of sighting?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. "A school bus driver in Lakewood thinks she recognized him from the age-progressed photos. She says there's a boy on her route who started riding about 6 months ago who bears a strong resemblance. She didn't make the connection until she saw a rerun of the documentary about missing children that featured Ethan's case." Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to breathe normally. Are you following up on it?" "We are. I've sent officers to interview the bus driver and to identify the child in question. I don't want to give you false hope, Mrs. Collins, but I thought you should know." After hanging up, Rebecca sat motionless at her kitchen table for nearly an hour. She had trained herself not to let these leads affect her too deeply. The disappointment, when they inevitably fell through, was too crushing. But despite her best efforts, a tiny flame of hope flickered to life inside her. She called her mother that evening, needing to share the news with someone who would understand both her cautious optimism and her fear of being hurt again. "Oh, Rebecca," Eleanor said after hearing about the potential sighting, "try not to get your hopes too high, dear, but I'm coming down tomorrow. You shouldn't be alone while waiting for news." Eleanor arrived the next morning, letting herself in with the spare key Rebecca had given her years ago. She found her daughter in the kitchen, staring absently at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "You didn't sleep," Eleanor observed, setting her overnight bag by the staircase before joining Rebecca at the table. Rebecca shook her head. "I kept checking my phone, expecting Detective Reeves to call again." She pushed the untouched coffee away. "It's stupid, Mom. I know better than to get my hopes up by now." Eleanor reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "It's not stupid to hope, Rebecca. It's human." She stood up and moved to the counter, where she began preparing a fresh pot of coffee. "When did the detective say she'd have more information?" She didn't give a specific timeline, just that she'd call as soon as they'd verified whether or not it's actually Ethan. Rebecca ran a hand through her uncombed hair. "It could be today, it could be next week." As the coffee began to brew, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma, Eleanor opened the refrigerator and frowned at its sparse contents. "I'm going to make us some breakfast, and then we're going to find something to keep you busy today. You can't just sit here staring at your phone." Rebecca didn't argue. Over the years, she had learned to appreciate her mother's practical, no-nonsense approach to difficult situations. While friends and other family members often didn't know what to say or do around her, treating her like she might shatter at any moment, Eleanor had always treated her grief as something to be worked through rather than tiptoed around. After a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, Eleanor suggested they go through some old family photos she'd brought from Pittsburgh. "I've been meaning to organize these into albums for years," she said, pulling several shoeboxes from her bag. "Some of them go back to when you were a baby. I thought maybe you could help me identify people in the older ones." Rebecca recognized the distraction tactic for what it was, but welcomed it nonetheless. They spread the photos across the dining room table, creating piles by decade and occasion. There were faded Polaroids from the 1970s, showing Eleanor and Rebecca's father in bell-bottoms and wide collars. School portraits of Rebecca and her brother Andy, their forced smiles and awkward poses marking the passage of years. Wedding photos, graduation photos, holiday gatherings, and inevitably, there were photos of Ethan, his newborn picture from the hospital, tiny and red-faced in a blue-striped hat. His first birthday, face and hands covered in cake frosting. His first day of kindergarten, standing proudly on the front porch with a backpack almost as big as he was. Rebecca paused on one particular photo. Ethan at age 5, sitting on his grandfather's lap in the old rocking chair that now resided in Eleanor's bedroom. John Collins had been a Vietnam veteran, quiet and stoic with everyone except his grandson. With Ethan, he had been playful and gentle, telling him modified war stories that became adventures about brave soldiers saving villages and rescuing puppies. Dad would have been devastated, Rebecca said softly, tracing her finger over the image of her father and son. John had passed away from heart failure just 2 months before Ethan's disappearance, never knowing that his beloved grandson would soon be gone as well. Eleanor glanced at the photo and smiled sadly. He adored that boy. Used to say Ethan reminded him of the person he was before the war. They continued sorting photos throughout the morning. Around noon, Eleanor announced she was going to make sandwiches for lunch and headed to the kitchen. Rebecca remained at the table, now organizing a stack of Christmas photos from the early 2000s. The sound of her phone ringing made her jump, her heart immediately racing. The screen showed Detective Reeves's number. With trembling fingers, Rebecca answered the call. "Mrs. Collins," the detective began, her tone giving nothing away. "We've identified the boy that the bus driver reported seeing." Rebecca closed her eyes, bracing herself. "Is it Ethan?" There was a brief pause. "No, I'm sorry, it's not him. The child in question is a year younger than Ethan would be now and has lived in Lakewood his entire life. His parents provided birth records and photographs documenting his childhood. The resemblance is remarkable, but it's definitely not your son." Although she had prepared herself for this outcome, the disappointment still hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "I understand," she managed to say. "Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, she sat motionless, letting the familiar wave of grief wash over her. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, a plate of sandwiches in hand, her questioning expression quickly shifting to concern when she saw her daughter's face. "It wasn't him," Rebecca said before her mother could ask. Eleanor set the plate down and wrapped her arms around Rebecca's shoulders. "I'm so sorry, dear." They ate lunch in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As Rebecca was clearing the plates, her phone rang again. Assuming it was Detective Reeves with some follow-up information, she answered without checking the screen. "Hello? Becky? It's Andy." Rebecca was surprised to hear her brother's voice. Andy lived in California now, working as a software engineer for a tech company. They spoke regularly, but usually scheduled their calls in advance due to the time difference and their busy lives. "Andy, hi. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine. I just wanted to check in. Mom texted me about the potential lead on Ethan. I gather it didn't pan out?" Rebecca sighed. "No, another dead end." She moved to the living room, settling on the couch. "How are things with you?" "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I've got some news." There was a note of excitement in Andy's voice that Rebecca hadn't heard in a long time. "I've accepted a job back east. I'll be moving to Philadelphia next month." For the first time that day, Rebecca felt a genuine smile form. "Andy, that's wonderful. Philadelphia's only about an hour from here. I know, that's part of why I took it. I miss you and Mom, and after being away for so long," he trailed off. "Well, family seems more important these days." They chatted for nearly an hour, with Andy filling her in on his new job, the apartment he was looking at, and his plans for the move. By the time they hung up, Rebecca felt marginally better. The failed lead still stung, but Andy's impending return to the East Coast gave her something positive to focus on. The rest of the day passed quietly. Eleanor suggested they take a walk around the neighborhood to get some fresh air, and Rebecca agreed, though she found herself unconsciously scanning the faces of teenagers they passed, an old habit she had never fully broken. That evening, after a simple dinner, Eleanor announced that she wanted to look through the attic for some old knitting patterns she thought she'd stored there. "I want to make Andy a scarf as a welcome home gift," she explained. I remember having a nice cable knit pattern somewhere in those boxes. Rebecca nodded absently, only half listening as she scrolled through her emails on her laptop. The light switches at the top of the stairs. And watch your step. There are still some loose boards up there that I haven't gotten around to fixing. Eleanor made her way upstairs and pulled down the attic ladder from the hallway ceiling. As she climbed up, she flicked on the light, illuminating the dusty space filled with cardboard boxes, old furniture, and holiday decorations. The attic ran the length of the house with a sloped ceiling that made standing upright possible only in the center. She began searching through the boxes labeled craft supplies, which were stacked near the entrance. After finding nothing in the first two boxes, she moved deeper into the attic, where additional storage containers were arranged in rough categories: Christmas, kitchen, old, John's things, and the most recent additions, Ethan's room. Eleanor paused by these boxes, her hand resting momentarily on one labeled Ethan Toys. She had been reluctant to push Rebecca to pack away these things, understanding her daughter's need to preserve these tangible connections to her son. But she had been relieved when Rebecca finally took that step earlier in the summer, seeing it as progress in her grief journey. Moving past Ethan's things, Eleanor spotted a stack of boxes against the far wall that looked promising. They were older, with yellowing tape and faded labels. As she made her way toward them, she had to maneuver around an old rocking chair, John's chair, the one from the photo they had looked at earlier. Something about the chair caught her attention. It wasn't where it had been the last time she'd visited the attic. Previously, it had been covered with an old sheet and pushed into the corner eave. Now it sat uncovered in the open space as if someone had been using it recently. Eleanor frowned, wondering if Rebecca had been coming up here to sit in her father's chair, perhaps finding some comfort in the connection to both her father and son. She made a mental note to ask her daughter about it later. As she approached the stack of boxes she'd been aiming for, Eleanor noticed something else odd. There was a small gap between the wall and the stack, and through it she could see what appeared to be another door or opening. Curious, she carefully moved two of the boxes aside, revealing what looked like a crude door cut into the knee wall. It was unpainted, made of rough plywood, with a simple latch keeping it closed. Eleanor had never noticed this before, though given the cluttered nature of the attic and the infrequency of her visits, that wasn't surprising. She assumed it must be access to some kind of storage space built into the eave. Perhaps that's where Rebecca had stored the knitting patterns, organizing them during the recent attic reorganization. Eleanor unlatched the small door and pulled it open, expecting to find more boxes. Instead, she found herself looking into what appeared to be a tiny makeshift room. The space was cramped, no more than 6 feet wide and perhaps 10 feet long following the slope of the roof. A small camping lantern hung from a nail, switched off. In one corner was a thin mattress with a pillow and blanket. A plastic crate. Beside it held what looked like some books and a portable radio. A gallon jug of water and some packaged snacks sat on the floor nearby. Eleanor stared in confusion. Why would there be a makeshift living space hidden in the attic? Had Rebecca created some kind of retreat for herself? It seemed unlikely. The space was too crude, too uncomfortable. As she peered further into the dim space, something on the wall caught her eye. Pinned to the sloped ceiling were several drawings, childish in their execution, but showing some artistic talent. They depicted scenes of war, soldiers with guns, explosions, helicopters hovering over jungles. And then Eleanor saw something that made her blood run cold. A small backpack, faded red with yellow stripes, leaned against the far wall of the hidden room. She recognized it instantly. It had been Ethan's favorite, the one he had insisted on using even though he had received a new one for his 6th birthday. The backpack that had been missing since the day of his disappearance. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. With shaking fingers, she reached for the camping lantern and switched it on, flooding the small space with light. In the improved visibility, she could see more details. A stack of composition notebooks on the crate, a few action figures lined up against the wall, and most disturbing of all, a small collection of framed photographs. She picked up one of the frames. The glass was dusty, but the image beneath was unmistakable. It was the same photo of John and Ethan in the rocking chair that she and Rebecca had been looking at downstairs just hours ago. Except this copy had been altered. The background had been colored over with green marker, creating what looked like a jungle setting. Crude drawings of helicopters had been added to the sky above. Eleanor's confusion gave way to a dawning horror. She backed out of the small room, still clutching the photograph, her mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. As she emerged, her heel caught on something on the attic floor, a loose board that rocked slightly under her weight. Instinctively, she looked down. The board was not actually loose, she realized, but hinged on one end, creating a small hiding place beneath the attic floor. Eleanor knelt down and lifted the board. Inside the cavity was a metal box, the kind used to store cash or important documents. With trembling hands, Eleanor lifted the box and opened it. Inside were stacks of papers, some yellowed with age. The one on top was immediately recognizable. It was John's military discharge paper from the Vietnam War. Beneath it were various military documents, medals, and what appeared to be journal entries written in John's distinctive handwriting. Eleanor began to read one of the journal pages, dated just a few months before John's death. The nightmares are getting worse. I keep seeing the village, the children running. Sometimes in my dreams, Ethan is there too, running from the helicopters. I can't let that happen to him. The world is getting more dangerous every day. I need to prepare him, teach him how to survive when the fighting reaches our shores. Rebecca doesn't understand. She thinks the war is over, but it never ends. It just changes location. Soon it will be here. Eleanor's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the journal. She forced herself to take several deep breaths, trying to quell the panic rising within her. The implications of what she was reading were too terrible to contemplate. Yet the evidence before her left little room for alternative explanations. She rifled through more papers in the box, finding additional journal entries that grew increasingly, paranoid and disjointed as the dates approached John's death. In the final entry, dated just 1 week before his fatal heart attack, he had written, "I've made all the preparations. The space is ready. I've stocked it with everything he'll need for the initial training period. Rebecca will never understand why this is necessary, so I can't tell her. Ethan is special. He has a warrior's spirit. I see it when we play our missions. He needs to be protected from what's coming, trained properly, so he can survive. 7 is the age I was when my father first taught me to shoot. It's time." Eleanor set the journal down, her mind racing. John had struggled with PTSD for decades after Vietnam, though he'd always refused formal treatment, insisting he could handle it on his own. The family had learned to navigate his occasional dark moods and startling reactions to loud noises, but he had seemed to improve in his later years, especially after Ethan was born, or so they had thought. Now, a horrifying alternative narrative was emerging. John's mental health had deteriorated severely in his final months, and somehow, he had involved his young grandson in his delusions. But that still didn't explain the hidden room with its signs of recent habitation. John had been long dead when Ethan disappeared, and why would the boy's backpack be here in this secret space? Eleanor returned to the hidden room, forcing herself to examine it more carefully despite her growing dread. The mattress showed signs of use. Indentations where a body had lain, the pillow bearing the impression of a head. The snacks included modern packaging dates, some from just months ago. This wasn't a 7-year-old space preserved in time. Someone had been living here. Recently, she picked up one of the composition notebooks from the crate and opened it. Inside were pages of childish handwriting that had gradually matured over time. The earlier entries were simple. "Grandpa says I need to stay hidden. The enemy is looking for me. I'm a special soldier on a secret mission." As she flipped through the book, the entries became more complex, the handwriting more mature. "It's been 2 years in the bunker now. Grandpa prepared everything for me before he was captured by the enemy. He said they would make it look like he died of a heart attack, but I know the truth. I stick to the training schedule he left for me. I only come out at night when it's safe." Eleanor's heart pounded as she continued reading. The entries documented a child's life in hiding, including details of nocturnal excursions to collect supplies, observations of the enemy, which seemed to include Rebecca and other adults, and strict adherence to a training regimen that John had apparently designed. The most recent entry was dated just 3 days ago. I heard Mom crying again last night. The enemy is very clever with their psychological tactics, trying to make me think she misses me. Grandpa warned me about this. He said they would pretend to be sad, to lure me out. I'm 14 now, too smart to fall for their tricks. When the war finally comes to Millfield, I'll be ready. I'll save Mom and everyone else who doesn't understand the danger. That's my mission. Shock gave way to disbelief, then to a surging horror that made Eleanor cry out involuntarily. The sound escaped her lips before she could stifle it, a strangled gasp that seemed deafening in the quiet attic. Grandma? Is that you? The voice came from behind her, a young male voice changing and cracking with adolescence. Eleanor whirled around, nearly losing her balance. A teenage boy stood in the entrance to the hidden room, his tall, lanky frame stooped slightly to avoid hitting his head on the sloped ceiling. He wore a faded t-shirt and jeans that were slightly too small for him. His sandy blonde hair was long and unkempt, falling into eyes that were hauntingly familiar. Ethan's eyes, though now set in a face that had lost its childish roundness. Ethan, Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. The boy's expression hardened. You weren't supposed to find this place, no one was. His gaze fell to the journal in her hands, and his eyes widened with alarm. What are you doing with Grandpa's papers? Those are classified. Eleanor struggled to find her voice, to make sense of the impossible situation unfolding before her. Ethan, sweetheart, is it really you? We've been looking for you for 7 years. Your mother— Stop it, Ethan hissed, stepping further into the room, his body tense. Grandpa warned me about this. The enemy would try to use my family against me, pretend to be them. He reached out and snatched the journal from her hands. These are Grandpa's war secrets. You're not authorized to read them. Eleanor raised her hands in a placating gesture, desperately trying to project a calm she didn't feel. I'm not the enemy, Ethan. I'm your grandmother. Your mother is downstairs right now. She's never stopped looking for you, never stopped loving you. Ethan's expression faltered slightly, uncertainty flickering across his features. Grandpa said, "You might seem convincing. He trained me for this." He backed toward the small door, clutching the journal to his chest. I need to stick to the mission parameters. Eleanor took a tentative step toward him. What mission, Ethan? What did your grandfather tell you? To stay hidden until I'm old enough and trained enough to fight, to protect the family when the war reaches Millfield. He recited this as if it were a familiar mantra, something repeated so many times it had become an unquestionable truth. Grandpa knew it was coming. He prepared this bunker for me, taught me everything I need to know. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture so tragic it took Eleanor's breath away. John, in the grip of PTSD-fueled paranoia, had created this hidden space and somehow convinced his young grandson that a war was imminent. Then, after John's death, Ethan, believing his grandfather's delusions, had hidden himself away during his own birthday party, following some prearranged plan. For 7 years, the boy had been living in this attic bunker, believing he was a soldier on a secret mission, while his family searched for him in vain. Ethan, Eleanor said gently, there is no war. Your grandfather was very ill when he died. He was confused about many things because of his experiences in Vietnam. That's exactly what the enemy would say, Ethan countered, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. They want me to think I'm crazy, just like they tried to do to Grandpa. Eleanor changed tactics. How have you survived up here all this time? How do you get food? Ethan seemed more comfortable with these practical questions. Grandpa stocked supplies at first. Then I learned to scavenge at night. Mom always keeps the kitchen well stocked. A hint of pride crept into his voice. I'm very good at moving silently. Part of my training. And no one ever saw you? In 7 years? Ethan shook his head. I only move around the house at night when everyone's asleep. I know every creaky floorboard, every squeaky hinge. I've mapped it all. He hesitated, then added, I've had some close calls with Mom. Sometimes she stays up late, and I have to abort the mission and return to base. The casual way he described sneaking around the house where his mother grieved for him made Eleanor's heart constrict. And you've never felt like letting your mother know you're alive? She's been in so much pain, Ethan. A troubled look crossed the boy's face. I write reports for her, he said defensively, for after the war, so she'll understand why I had to do this. Grandpa said it was the only way to keep her safe, to keep everyone safe. He glanced toward the door, growing agitated. I need to secure the area. You've compromised the bunker. Ethan, please, Eleanor said, taking another careful step toward him. Come downstairs with me. See your mother. She's missed you so much. Ethan backed away, shaking his head vehemently. No, that's against mission protocols. I have to stay hidden. His voice rose slightly, panic edging into his tone. Grandpa said the enemy would try to extract me from the bunker. I won't let them win. Eleanor realized she was losing him. If he fled now, he might find another hiding place, one they would never discover. She needed to keep him talking, to somehow break through the elaborate fantasy his grandfather had constructed. Your mother redid your room? She said, seizing on the first thought that came to mind. It's all different now. She painted it green instead of blue. This unexpected detail seemed to catch Ethan off guard. Green, but blue was my favorite color. No. But she needed to make some changes to help with her grief. She thought you were gone forever, Ethan. Something shifted in the boy's expression, a crack in the facade of the soldier he'd been pretending to be. She really thinks I'm gone? Eleanor nodded. We all did. The police, the entire town, everyone has been searching for you for 7 years. Your disappearance destroyed your parents' marriage. Your father moved across town. Your mother has never been the same. Ethan's composure wavered further. But Grandpa said they would be safer if I was hidden. That when the war came, I could protect them because the enemy wouldn't know about me. His voice had lost some of its certainty, taking on the quality of a confused child rather than a determined soldier. Your grandfather was very sick, Ethan, Eleanor said softly. He experienced terrible things in Vietnam, and sometimes those experiences made him believe things that weren't true. There is no war coming to Millfield. There is no enemy searching for you. There's just your mother downstairs who has spent every day of the last 7 years wondering what happened to her little boy. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, his carefully constructed worldview beginning to crumble. But Grandpa wouldn't lie to me. He said I was special, that I had a warrior's heart like him. He wasn't lying, Eleanor assured him. He believed what he told you. And you are special and brave and strong. Look at how you've survived up here, how resourceful you've been. She extended her hand to him. But it's time to come home now, Ethan. The real mission is over. Ethan stared at her outstretched hand, years of indoctrination warring with the simple human desire to be with his family. I don't know if I can, he whispered. I've been a soldier for so long. I don't remember how to be a normal kid. You don't have to be a soldier or a normal kid, Eleanor told him. You just have to be Ethan. That's all your mother has ever wanted. A floorboard creaked outside the hidden room, and both Ethan and Eleanor turned toward the sound. Rebecca stood in the attic proper, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other gripping the edge of a box for support. Her face was drained of color, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Mom, she whispered. I heard voices. I thought you might need help with. Her gaze fixed on the teenage boy standing in the hidden doorway, and her voice faltered. Despite the changes 7 years had wrought, there was no mistaking her son. Ethan? Ethan froze, like a wild animal caught in headlights. The sight of his mother seemed to render him immobile, all his training and preparation dissolving in the face of reality. Rebecca took a tentative step forward, afraid that any sudden movement might cause this apparition to vanish. Ethan, is it really you? Where have you? How are you? She couldn't complete a thought, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her son standing before her in her own attic. Eleanor moved to her daughter's side, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "Rebecca, listen to me. This is going to be very difficult to understand, but Ethan has been here in the house all this time." She gestured to the hidden room. "Your father built this space before he died. He convinced Ethan that a war was coming, that he needed to hide to stay safe." Rebecca shook her head in confusion and dawning horror. "Dad did this? He took Ethan, but he was already dead when he prepared everything before he died," Eleanor explained, keeping her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt. "He was very ill, Rebecca. His PTSD was much worse than any of us realized. He created this elaborate delusion about a coming war, and somehow he convinced Ethan to hide during the birthday party, to follow a plan they had made together." Rebecca's gaze never left her son, who remained frozen in the doorway of his hidden sanctuary. "You've been here all this time, while we searched everywhere for you?" Ethan finally found his voice, though it was small and uncertain. "Grandpa said it was the only way to keep you safe. He said the enemy would use you to get to me if they knew I existed." Tears began to stream down his face. "I thought I was protecting you." Rebecca took another step forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. "There is no enemy, Ethan. There never was." Her voice broke as she struggled to process the magnitude of what her father had done. Dad was sick. The war damaged him in ways we never fully understood. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the military posture he'd been maintaining giving way to the exhaustion of a child who had been carrying an impossible burden. "He seemed so sure," he whispered. "He showed me maps, taught me codes, told me stories about the enemy." Fresh tears welled in his eyes. "I thought I was being brave like him." The three of them stood in a tableau of heartbreak and revelation, the dusty attic air heavy with 7 years of loss and deception. Eleanor kept her hand on Rebecca's arm, feeling her daughter trembling beneath her touch. "Can I?" Rebecca's voice faltered. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Can I hug you, Ethan?" The question hung in the air between them. For a moment, Ethan remained frozen, years of conditioning warring with the simple human need for his mother's embrace. Then, with a small sob, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Rebecca enveloped her son in her arms, holding him with the desperate strength of a woman who had thought this moment would never come. Ethan stood stiffly at first, then gradually melted into her embrace, his arms coming up to circle her waist. "I'm sorry, Mom," he choked out between sobs. "I thought I was protecting you. Grandpa said you wouldn't understand, that it would put you in danger if you knew." Rebecca couldn't speak, could only hold her son tighter as tears streamed down her face. Eleanor watched them, her own eyes brimming, her mind still reeling from the revelation of her late husband's actions. After what seemed like an eternity, Rebecca pulled back slightly, cupping Ethan's face in her hands. "Let me look at you," she whispered, studying the teenage features that had replaced the little boy's face she had memorized. "You've grown so much." Ethan managed a watery smile. "I marked my height on the wall inside," he said, gesturing toward the hidden room. "Like we used to do on the kitchen doorframe, remember?" Rebecca nodded, another wave of emotion washing over her. Such a normal childhood tradition, continued in the most abnormal of circumstances. "I remember," she said softly. "We should go downstairs," Eleanor suggested gently. "We'll be more comfortable, and I think we all need to sit down for this conversation." Rebecca nodded, keeping an arm around Ethan's shoulders as if afraid he might disappear again if she let go. "Yes, let's go down. Are you hungry, Ethan? I can make you something to eat." The question was so motherly, so normal amid the extraordinary situation that Ethan let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I usually raid the kitchen at night when you're asleep. I had some cereal around midnight." The casual admission stunned Rebecca anew. "You've been coming into the kitchen at night all this time?" Ethan nodded, looking somewhat abashed. "I'm really quiet. Grandpa taught me how to walk without making noise, and I know which floorboards creak. They made their way down the attic ladder, Ethan moving with the practiced ease of someone who had navigated this route countless times, though usually under cover of darkness. As they descended to the second floor, he looked around with wide eyes, taking in the familiar surroundings from a daytime perspective. "It's so bright," he murmured, blinking in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the hallway window. "I usually only move around at night." Rebecca kept her arm around him as they walked, partly to comfort him and partly to reassure herself that he was real, that this miracle was actually happening. They passed the door to what had been Ethan's bedroom, and he paused, looking at it uncertainly. "It's different now," he said. "You made it an office. I've seen it through the door crack sometimes." The revelation that Ethan had been watching them, moving through the house unseen for years, continued to stagger Rebecca. "Yes, I couldn't keep it the same forever. It was too painful." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I understood. I watched you, crying in there sometimes. I wanted to tell you I was okay, but Grandpa's rules." He trailed off, the certainty of his mission already beginning to crumble in the face of reality. They continued downstairs to the kitchen, where Eleanor guided them to sit at the table while she filled 3 glasses with water. Her hands were still shaking, but the practical task gave her something to focus on beyond the overwhelming emotions of the moment. "Ethan," she said as she set the glasses on the table, "how much do you understand about what happened? About why your grandfather did this?" Ethan took a sip of water before answering, his eyes downcast. "Grandpa said he fought in a terrible war, and that the same enemy was regrouping, planning to attack America again. He said most people couldn't see the signs, but he could because he'd faced them before." He glanced up briefly. "He said I was special, that I had warrior blood, and that he needed to train me in secret so I could help when the fighting started." Rebecca made a sound of distress. "Oh, Dad," she whispered. "What were you thinking?" "He was very convincing," Ethan said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "He had maps and newspaper clippings. He said the government was hiding the truth because they didn't want people to panic." Eleanor nodded gravely. "Your grandfather suffered from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. The war affected his mind in ways that made it difficult for him to separate past dangers from present reality. He wasn't lying to you, Ethan. He truly believed what he was telling you." "But there's no war coming?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "No, sweetheart," Rebecca assured him. "The country has its problems, but we're not on the brink of invasion or attack." Ethan absorbed this, his expression troubled. "So everything I've been doing, all the training, the hiding, the missions, it was all for nothing?" "Not for nothing," Eleanor said carefully. "Your grandfather was ill, but his love for you was real. In his mind, he was protecting you, preparing you for dangers he believed were real. And you were incredibly brave," Rebecca added, reaching across the table to take her son's hand. "You were just a little boy, and you did what you thought was right, what you were told was necessary to protect your family." Ethan's face crumpled. "But I hurt you. I made you think I was gone. I watched you crying, and I still hid." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "You were a child following an adult's instructions. This wasn't your fault, Ethan. None of it was your fault." The kitchen fell silent as they all processed the enormity of the situation. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to soften, casting long shadows across the backyard, the same yard where Ethan had supposedly vanished 7 years ago. "What happens now?" Ethan finally asked, his voice tentative. It was a question none of them had ready answers for. How did one reintegrate a child who had been living as a secret soldier in an attic for 7 years? A child who had missed school, medical care, normal social development, and countless other experiences that shaped adolescence? "First, we need to call the police," Eleanor said gently. "They need to know you've been found. There are a lot of people who have been searching for you for a very long time." Ethan tensed visibly. "The police? But Grandpa said they couldn't be trusted, that some of them worked for the enemy." Rebecca exchanged a worried glance with her mother. Deprogramming Ethan from years of paranoid indoctrination would clearly be a long process. The police have been trying to find you to bring you home, Ethan. Detective Reeves has never stopped looking for you. She'll be so relieved to know you're safe. We also need to call your father, Eleanor added, and your brother, Rebecca. They both need to know. Rebecca nodded, though the thought of explaining this impossible situation to Michael and Andy was overwhelming. How could anyone make sense of what John had done? How could she herself ever come to terms with the fact that while she had been searching the country for her son, he had been living in her attic, moving through the house at night like a ghost? Will I have to leave? Ethan asked suddenly, fear creeping into his voice. Will they take me away? Rebecca immediately shook her head. No, sweetheart, this is your home. You'll stay with me. She hesitated, then added, but there will be doctors who will want to talk to you, to help you adjust to normal life again. Therapists, Eleanor clarified. Like the doctor you've been seeing, Rebecca. People who can help Ethan understand what happened and how to move forward. Ethan looked uncertain but didn't object. Instead, he asked, what about school? I'm way behind, aren't I? The question was so normal, so typical of a 14-year-old's concerns, that Rebecca felt a fresh wave of emotion. We'll figure that out, she assured him. You've been reading and learning on your own, haven't you? Ethan nodded. Grandpa left me textbooks and assignment schedules, and I've been borrowing books from your shelves at night. He looked sheepish. I always put them back exactly where they were. That's a good start, Eleanor said encouragingly. And there are programs for homeschooled children to help them transition to regular schools. You're a smart boy, Ethan, you'll catch up. Rebecca reached for her phone, which sat on the kitchen counter. I should call Detective Reeves first, she said, her voice steadier now as she began to move from shock toward action. She's been with the case from the beginning. As Rebecca made the call, Eleanor observed Ethan, who was looking around the kitchen with the wide-eyed wonder of someone seeing familiar surroundings in an entirely new context. He ran his fingers along the edge of the table, touched the salt and pepper shakers, examined the refrigerator magnets, simple objects that had been part of his nighttime world but now existed in daylight. It's so different, he murmured, catching Eleanor watching him. Everything is the same, but it feels different in the daytime. It will take time to get used to living normally again, Eleanor said gently. But we'll all help you, Ethan. Your mother, your father, your Uncle Andy. We're all going to be here for you. Ethan nodded, though uncertainty still clouded his expression. Grandpa said the daytime was dangerous, that's when they would be watching for me. He glanced nervously toward the windows. It's hard to feel safe with all the light. The statement was heartbreaking in its revelation of how thoroughly John's delusions had shaped Ethan's worldview. Before Eleanor could respond, Rebecca ended her call, her face pale but composed. Detective Reeves is on her way, she said, returning to the table. She could hardly believe it. She's bringing a doctor with her just to make sure Ethan is physically okay. She reached for her son's hand again. Is that all right, sweetheart? To have the detective and a doctor check you over? Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly. Will they make me talk about everything? About Grandpa and the bunker and the missions? Eventually, yes, Rebecca answered honestly. But not all at once. Today they'll just want to make sure you're safe and healthy. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. I'll be with you the whole time, I promise. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Rebecca called Michael, who initially thought the call was a cruel prank until she put Ethan on the phone. His shocked silence, followed by broken sobs, made Ethan realize for the first time how deeply his disappearance had affected his father. Next, she called Andy, who immediately said he was driving to Millfield that night, unable to wait until his planned move the following month. Throughout the calls, Ethan remained quiet, occasionally answering direct questions but mostly watching his mother with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. 7 years of living as a hidden soldier, of viewing the outside world as enemy territory, couldn't be undone in a single afternoon. When Detective Reeves arrived with Dr. Patel, the family physician, Ethan visibly tensed, pressing closer to Rebecca on the couch where they had relocated to await the visitors. The detective, A tall woman with kind eyes and graying hair stopped in the doorway of the living room, momentarily overcome by the sight of the boy she had spent so many years searching for. "Ethan," she said softly, her professional demeanor briefly cracking. "I can't believe it's really you." Dr. Patel, sensing Ethan's anxiety, approached slowly, setting her medical bag on a side table. "Hello, Ethan, I'm Dr. Patel. I've known your mother for many years. I'd like to check your health, if that's okay. Nothing invasive, just the basics." Ethan looked to Rebecca for reassurance, receiving a nod and an encouraging smile. "Okay," he agreed tentatively. "But Mom stays with me." "Of course," the doctor agreed. As Dr. Patel conducted a basic examination, checking Ethan's heart rate, blood pressure, reflexes, and general physical condition, Detective Reeves spoke quietly, with Eleanor in the kitchen, recording her account of the discovery. "It's the most extraordinary case I've ever encountered," the detective admitted, shaking her head in disbelief. "All these years and he was right here." "John was so sick," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "More than any of us realized. To do this to his own grandson, to Rebecca." She couldn't continue, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her late husband's actions. Detective Reeves patted her hand sympathetically. "PTSD can cause severe paranoia and delusions, especially when left untreated. From what you've told me, it sounds like John genuinely believed he was protecting Ethan." "That doesn't make it any easier to forgive," Eleanor said quietly. "Look at what he's done to this family." In the living room, Dr. Patel was completing her initial assessment. "Physically, he's in surprisingly good shape given the circumstances," she reported to Rebecca. "He's underweight and shows signs of vitamin D deficiency, which is expected given the lack of sunlight. But his reflexes are good, his lungs are clear, and his heart sounds healthy." "What about his mental health?" Rebecca asked quietly, her arm still wrapped protectively around Ethan's shoulders. Dr. Patel's expression grew more serious. "That will require specialized assessment. I'd recommend a child psychologist who specializes in trauma and deprogramming." She glanced at Ethan, who was watching their exchange with wary eyes. "But he's alert, oriented, and communicative, which are all positive signs. Children are remarkably resilient." Detective Reeves joined them, nodding respectfully to Ethan before addressing Rebecca. "I've spoken with my captain. We'll need a formal statement from Ethan when he's ready, but we're not going to push that today. For now, we're just documenting his recovery and closing the missing persons case." She paused, her professional demeanor softening. "This is the outcome we always hope for but rarely get. It's something of a miracle." Ethan shifted uncomfortably under the detective's gaze. "Are you going to arrest me?" he asked suddenly. "Detective." Reeves looked startled. "Arrest you? Of course not. Why would you think that?" "Grandpa said if I was ever discovered, the authorities would detain me for questioning about our operation." Ethan's voice was small but serious. "He said I should never let myself be taken alive." The adults exchanged alarmed glances at this revelation of just how deep John's paranoid indoctrination had gone. Detective Reeves crouched down to Ethan's eye level, her expression gentle but firm. "Ethan, you haven't done anything wrong. You're a child who was misled by an adult you trusted. No one is going to detain you or question you against your will. You're home now with your family where you belong." Ethan studied her face, seemingly searching for deceit, a habit born from years of viewing the outside world as enemy territory. Whatever he saw in the detective's honest gaze must have reassured him, because he nodded slightly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. The doorbell rang, startling everyone. Eleanor went to answer it, returning moments later with Michael Collins. Ethan's father stood in the doorway of the living room, his face pale with shock as he beheld his son in the flesh after 7 years of agonizing absence. "Ethan," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "My God, it's really you." Ethan stared at his father, taking in the changes time had wrought. Michael had aged considerably in the 7 years since Ethan had last seen him. His once dark hair now liberally streaked with gray, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. His posture slightly stooped as if bearing an invisible weight. "Dad?" Ethan said hesitantly, almost a question. Michael crossed the room in 3 long strides and dropped to his knees in front of his son. Unlike Rebecca, who had approached carefully, Michael gathered Ethan into a fierce embrace without hesitation, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I never stopped looking for you," he choked out. "Never. Not for one day." Ethan remained stiff in his father's arms for a moment, then gradually relaxed, bringing his own arms up to return the hug. Over Michael's shoulder, his eyes met Rebecca's, questioning, uncertain. "It's okay," she mouthed silently, tears streaming down her face as she watched her ex-husband and son reunite. Detective Reeves quietly excused herself, promising to return the next day when the family had had some time to process the extraordinary reunion. Dr. Patel left a list of recommended specialists and instructions for Ethan's immediate care, emphasizing proper nutrition, gradual sun exposure, and a gentle reintroduction to normal routines. As evening approached, the initial shock began to give way to practical considerations. Where would Ethan sleep? His old room was now Rebecca's office, and the thought of returning to the attic bunker was out of the question. They settled on the guest room for the time being, with Rebecca promising they would shop for new bedroom furniture as soon as. Ethan felt ready. "I don't want to be alone," Ethan admitted as Rebecca showed him to the guest room. 7 years of solitude had left their mark, making the prospect of a night isolated in an unfamiliar room daunting. "I'll stay with you," Rebecca assured him immediately. "I can bring in the armchair from my room and sleep there." Eleanor volunteered to prepare dinner, while Rebecca helped Ethan sort through some immediate needs. With Michael's help, they gathered clothing that might fit Ethan's teenage frame, a challenge given his unusual height for his age and his lean build. Michael offered to go shopping for essentials first thing in the morning. Throughout these practical activities, Ethan observed everything with wide-eyed fascination, asking occasional questions about devices and products that had appeared during his years in hiding. Smartphones, tablets, streaming services, new food products. The world had changed in ways both subtle and significant during his seclusion. As they gathered around the dinner table that evening, Ethan, Rebecca, Michael, and Eleanor, the surreal nature of the situation struck them anew. For 7 years they had been incomplete, broken by Ethan's absence. Now miraculously they were together again, though forever changed by the experience. Ethan approached the meal with caution, unused to eating in bright light with others watching. He held his fork awkwardly, having grown accustomed to eating, quickly in darkness or by the dim light of his camping lantern. When Michael attempted to engage him in conversation about his interests, Ethan struggled to articulate anything beyond the limited world of his bunker existence. "I like reading about history," he offered tentatively. "Grandpa left me lots of books about military campaigns and famous battles." He hesitated, then added, "But I also found Mom's novels on the bookshelf. I like those too, especially the mysteries." Rebecca smiled, heartened by this small glimpse of normal adolescent interests beneath the layers of indoctrination. "I have lots more books you might enjoy, and the library in town has thousands." The mention of going to the library, a public place, caused visible anxiety to ripple across Ethan's face. "Outside?" he asked, his voice tightening. "With other people?" "Not right away," Rebecca assured him quickly. "Only when you feel ready. There's no rush, Ethan. Everything can happen at your pace." After dinner, as Eleanor washed dishes and Michael made phone calls to arrange an extended leave from work, Rebecca took Ethan to the living room. Family photographs lined the mantel, school pictures of Ethan from kindergarten through first grade, vacation photos from a trip to Disney World when he was 4, a professional family portrait taken just months before his disappearance, and then jarringly there was a gap, followed by age progression photos created by forensic artists over the years, showing how Ethan might have looked at ages 10, 12, and most recently, 14. Rebecca had displayed these prominently, a visual reminder that despite the passing years, she had never stopped looking for her son, never stopped imagining his continued growth and development. Ethan stared at these speculative images of himself, comparing them to his actual appearance. "They got some things right," he observed, studying the age 14 composite. "But my hair is longer, and my nose is different." The artists did their best with computer programs and genetics, Rebecca explained, but they couldn't account for everything. She hesitated, then asked, "Would it be okay if I took a picture of you now? A real one, to replace these approximations?" Ethan considered this, his brow furrowing. "Grandpa said photographs could be used to track me," he said slowly. "But I guess that doesn't matter anymore, does it? Since I'm not hiding." Rebecca's heart ached at this reminder of how thoroughly John's paranoia had shaped Ethan's thinking. "No, it doesn't matter anymore," she confirmed gently. "You don't need to hide." She took a simple photo with her phone. Ethan standing awkwardly by the fireplace, his expression solemn but his eyes alive with intelligence. Looking at the image, Rebecca was struck by how much he resembled Michael at the same age, with hints of her own features in the shape of his eyes and mouth. "Can I see it?" Ethan asked, and Rebecca handed him the phone. He stared at his own image for a long moment. "It's strange to see myself like this," he admitted. "I only had the small mirror in the bunker. I used to wonder sometimes if I was still really me, or if I was turning into someone else without knowing it." The philosophical depth of this observation caught Rebecca off guard, reminding her that despite his isolation, Ethan had continued to develop intellectually and emotionally, albeit in complex and probably distorted ways. Behind the frightened, indoctrinated exterior was a thoughtful, intelligent young man trying to make sense of his extraordinary circumstances. Later that night, after Michael reluctantly left with promises to return first thing in the morning, and Eleanor settled into Rebecca's room, Rebecca kept her promise to stay with Ethan in the guest room. She arranged the armchair near the bed, equipped with a pillow and blanket, while Ethan explored the strange new territory of a proper mattress, clean sheets, and multiple pillows. "It's so soft," he remarked, bouncing slightly on the edge of the bed. "And big." "Too big?" Rebecca asked, worried that the transition from his sparse bunker accommodations might be overwhelming. Ethan shook his head. "Just different." He glanced toward the window, where moonlight filtered through the curtains. "Can we leave a light on? I'm not used to sleeping in complete darkness." Rebecca switched on the small bedside lamp. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." As Ethan settled under the covers, he looked at his mother with an expression that seemed suddenly younger, more vulnerable. "Is this real?" he asked softly. "Or am I going to wake up back in the attic?" Rebecca moved from the armchair to sit on the edge of the bed, taking Ethan's hand in hers. "This is real, sweetheart. You're home, you're safe, and I promise you, when you wake up tomorrow, I'll still be here." Ethan held onto her hand tightly. "I used to dream about this sometimes," he confessed, "about coming out of hiding and everything being okay. But Grandpa's training always made me push those thoughts away. He said they were dangerous, that they would compromise my mission." "Your grandfather was very wrong," Rebecca said, choosing her words carefully. "He loved you, but his illness made him believe things that weren't true. Your mission now is just to be Ethan, to heal, to learn, to grow up like any other teenager." "I don't know how to do that," Ethan admitted, his voice small. "We'll figure it out together," Rebecca promised, "one day at a time, As Ethan drifted to sleep, still holding her hand, Rebecca watched the rise and fall of his chest, scarcely daring to believe that her son, her little boy who had vanished on his 7th birthday, was truly back in her life. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with therapy sessions, legal proceedings, medical evaluations, and the complex process of reintegrating Ethan into normal society. But in this moment, watching her child sleep peacefully for the first time in 7 years, Rebecca felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. The news of Ethan's miraculous return spread through Millfield like wildfire the next day. Reporters gathered outside the Collins home, forcing Detective Reeves to establish a police presence to protect the family's privacy. The story captured national attention: the boy who had vanished at his own birthday party, only to be discovered living in his grandmother's attic 7 years later, indoctrinated by his Vietnam veteran grandfather to believe he was a soldier in training for an impending war. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of John Collins's elaborate deception came to light. Investigators discovered that he had begun preparing the hidden attic space more than a year before his death, gradually stockpiling supplies, creating training materials, and constructing a belief system designed to keep Ethan hidden even after John himself was gone. His journals revealed a mind increasingly consumed by PTSD-fueled paranoia, convinced that the enemies he had fought in Vietnam were regrouping for an attack on American soil, and that his grandson possessed special qualities that made him a target. Ethan's recovery and reintegration progressed in small, sometimes painful steps. A specialized trauma therapist worked with him daily, helping him separate reality from the elaborate fantasy his grandfather had constructed. Michael moved back to Millfield, renting a house just a few blocks from Rebecca's to remain close to Ethan. Andy arrived as promised, delaying his job in Philadelphia to spend time with his newly returned nephew. 3 months after Ethan's discovery, Rebecca stood in the doorway of his new bedroom, properly furnished now with a modern bed, desk, and bookshelf filled with age-appropriate novels, science books, and comics that Andy had introduced him to. Ethan sat at the desk, focused intently on a laptop computer as he worked through an online learning program designed to help him catch up on the education he had missed. "How's it going?" Rebecca asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Ethan looked up with a smile that was becoming more natural, more spontaneous with each passing day. "Good. I just finished the algebra module. It's not that different from the math Grandpa taught me, actually." Rebecca entered the room, noticing the neatly made bed, the organized desk, the clothes properly hung in the closet rather than folded military style in precise stacks as Ethan had initially insisted upon. Small signs of normality, of healing. "Dr. Winters called," she said, referring to Ethan's therapist. "She thinks you might be ready to try a small outing next week, maybe just to the bookstore, with me and Dad." Ethan's expression grew serious as he considered this. His reintroduction to the outside world had been extremely gradual. First just short walks in their fenced backyard, then ventures to the front porch, always with family members present to reassure him that there was no enemy lurking, no danger awaiting him beyond. "The safety of the house, I think I'd like that," he said finally. "Andy says there are graphic novels I should check out and they don't have them at the online store." Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude for her brother's efforts to connect with Ethan through shared interests. "Then we'll plan for Tuesday afternoon when the store is usually quiet." Ethan nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Mom, do you think Grandpa knew what he was doing was wrong?" It was a question Ethan returned to periodically, trying to reconcile his loving memories of John with the harm his grandfather had caused. Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, giving the question the serious consideration it deserved. "I think your grandfather's illness made it impossible for him to see clearly," she said carefully. "In his mind, he was protecting you from dangers that felt very real to him because of his experiences in the war. He loved you very much, but that love became twisted by his fear and trauma." Ethan absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. "Dr. Winters says sometimes our brains can trick us into believing things that aren't true, especially when we've been through something really scary or traumatic. She says that's what happened to Grandpa, and then he passed those beliefs to me." "That's a good way of understanding it," Rebecca agreed, impressed by Ethan's growing psychological insight. "It doesn't make what happened any less painful, but it helps us make sense of it." Ethan turned back to his laptop, closing the algebra program. "I've been writing about it," he said. "Dr. Winters suggested it might help me process everything. May I read it someday?" Rebecca asked, curious about how Ethan was interpreting his extraordinary experience in his own words. Ethan nodded. "When it's ready. It's still kind of messy in my head sometimes." Rebecca stood, dropping a kiss on the top of his head, a gesture he had initially flinched away from but now accepted with ease. "Take your time. We have plenty of it now." As she left the room, Rebecca paused in the hallway, overwhelmed by a wave of gratitude. Against all odds, her son had returned to her. Not unchanged. No one could endure what Ethan had and remain the same. But alive. Healing. and with the promise of a future that had seemed impossible just months ago. In the living room, she picked up the framed photograph that now held the place of honor on the mantel, Ethan at 14, standing between Rebecca and Michael at the entrance to their home, all three smiling tentatively into the camera. It wasn't a perfect picture. The shadows under Ethan's eyes spoke of his ongoing struggles with nighttime anxiety, and the strain of the past 7 years was evident in the lines on the adults' faces. But it was real, and it was precious, and it marked the beginning of their journey back to wholeness as a family. 7 years after a little boy had vanished at his birthday party, leaving a community searching and a family shattered, an impossible miracle had occurred. Through the fog of grief and loss, through years of unanswered questions and fading hope, a path back to joy had appeared where none seemed possible. Not through the dramatic rescue they had imagined, but through a grandmother's simple trip to the attic to retrieve old knitting patterns, leading to a discovery that would change all their lives forever. If you've been moved by this incredible journey from tragedy to healing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary true stories that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope, even in the darkest of times. Every week we bring you new stories that will touch your heart, challenge your perceptions, and remind you that even in this world of constant change and uncertainty, miracles can and do happen when we least expect them. Join our community and never miss another inspirational story that might just change the way you see the world around you.